I often think of how I wish my parents had never divorced, and I wish that they were still together. And this is a thought that only occurred to me in the recent few years of my life, but I really notice it. It comes to my mind. I'm reminded of this thought when I speak with a parent of mine. Some context on that: when I'm speaking to my parents, when I speak to one of them individually, I've noticed at times a derision between my personality and their personality. And at a certain point in my life, I decided to just give in and let them have their way and go along with certain views of theirs, or if they had certain attitudes that I don't share, just, I'm not going to make a point to distinguish myself. I'm just going to go along with it and say, oh, that's great, that's fine. And I realized that those parts of each of them that now feel unbalanced to me, that I don't necessarily agree with, those points of derision, they were once balanced out by each other when they were a couple. And they're like fire and ice. And they team each other in a complementary way. So it's been more of my life that they've been apart than they have been together. So it's hard to say if it actually was that way, right? Like if it's just sort of my nostalgia goggles on and I'm thinking positively that, oh yeah, they were very complementary in that way. But even now, when I consider them separately, it certainly seems like they would be a good balance for each other, right? One might pull the other in a bit more of a direction they need to be in one area, etc. And so I'm their child, right? I'm a product of fire and ice. I am fire ice. That's me. I'm ice fire. I'm fire ice. And so who I am is largely a combination of who they are, right? Fire and ice. So for me, someone who is both of those things, it makes a lot of sense for me to feel like fire on its own is unbalanced, or that water on its own is unbalanced, which is what I feel sometimes when I talk to one of them individually. Right? That's how I feel. But for ice, it would make sense that ice would decide to no longer want to be with fire. Right? Ice embraced its own iciness and rejected this idea of some kind of grand synthesis. Now, I'm the product of that grand synthesis, so I'd obviously see the benefits of it. Right? But maybe for them, they're ice. Why synthesize? Why go in the discomfort zone? It's a common idea to say that opposites attract, and that this could actually be what makes for an optimal relationship, people having complementary traits that are different between them. And if you think of it, it's also the quintessential formula for life. You have a male and a female, the opposites of the two types. They meet together, and when they form a union, life is formed. And there's a lot of reasons, though, why you wouldn't want to unify, right? Why you wouldn't want to be balanced out by somebody else, by your opposite. But balance as a concept, it's easy to say that it's different between each and every one of us, but I'll make a case that it's not really something that's just in the eye of the beholder. Anyone can claim that they feel a certain thing is out of balance, but what that really probably is they're just saying they're uncomfortable with that kind of thing changing, right? So one person, their standard will be that, eating 3 meals a day, this is where I feel balance is. And for another person, it's going to be 6 meals a day. Someone else will say, 1 meal a day, that's my perfect balance, my balanced life. But we could look at the big picture, and we could sample the eating habits of all humans, and then we would usually find a type of pattern, right? And then we would have a different sense of which one of those people is actually balanced, right? I'm using the word kind of loosely here, but the idea is that even though our definitions of what is balanced are going to change from person to person, there still can be a more objective metric when we look at the population as a whole, right? Because maybe isolated within yourself, if you're fire, you think, wow, ice is so unbalancing and destabilizing and bad. I don't want ice. But maybe fire and ice together can make something really cool. Like me. I'm fire ice, remember from earlier? So I want to talk a bit about loneliness, and that's something that it's an interesting word, because I wouldn't say I felt loneliness since I was in high school. That sort of sad, deep feeling of loneliness, you know what it is. But when I think of just the quality of being alone or more dedicated to a state of solitude, it's hard to think that I've ever not been alone in my life. And that might just be the fate of being a human being, of being a person. You're limited to your own experience. Yet it also feels like that's something that I've created for myself. And so in high school, when I felt the most lonely, ironically, that's also the time where I was around the most people. But whether it's a lot of people or even just a few set of people that you have a lot in common with, that can make you very aware of the differences between you, right? The more you're seeing each other, the more you're starting to notice what actually makes you different. Maybe it makes you more aware of that divide, right? That invisible line that separates you from other people, that can't be transcended in this flesh realm. And maybe when you form deeper relationships is when you're the most aware of this divide, because it can feel like you're chasing this closeness to this other person, and that closeness with someone else is an attempt to pierce through that line which you can't pierce through. And maybe when you form deeper relationships is when you're the most aware of that divide, because it can feel like your closeness with others is an attempt to pierce through that line that you can't pierce. Comparatively, when you keep some distance with others, you can actually have a bit more positive view of things. You can enjoy the sort of surfacey pleasures of connection without getting too close to that invisible line that can make things uncomfortable or disturbing. Might be a better way to put it. On one hand, in my life, personally, I can say that I've had so many comrades, so many true, fantastic friends and people I've connected with, and that is certainly a blessing. And I know that if I was looking to call on someone else, if I was looking to call on another for help, I'd have so many people who'd be willing to answer. And even people that I haven't maybe spoken to in years, I know I could reach out to and they'd be down to talk, you know? I could extend that example. I could say that, you know, if I were to travel to most cities in the country, I know that there'd be people who'd be willing and happy to see me in those places. I've got so many great memories with great people, blah, 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 all very good. Yet, I feel like if I were not to call on anyone for help, if I were to not visit those cities, not hit people up, I think it would be easy for me to disappear, because I don't have too many that I'm extremely close to. I feel like I have a lot of positive relationships, but not many deep relationships, I suppose. I don't think I'm too particularly close with anyone. And maybe most people aren't, you know, I don't know. Maybe that's somewhat normal. But I would say I'm probably having less of that closeness than average, if we're thinking of a bell curve. I bring this up partially because I wonder if this is a trait that I may have inherited from my parents. Very literally, they had a close relationship together that ended, and something happened. Maybe one of them couldn't stand that invisible line anymore, and so they chose to distance themselves from that closeness, right? Because it reminds you of that. And more specifically, less from the this is the brutal truth of being a human aspect of things. I also noticed in my childhood, and I guess still now, that neither of my parents ever really had close friendships. You know, they'd have some friendships, kind of like I described about myself, where it's people who are going to pick up the phone if you need help. But besides that, I watched them, and they might occasionally have a new friendship, and it could be one that sort of seems promising, and it might have built some momentum, where it seems like they're approaching some deeper connection, some deeper closeness, and I'm always excited about that. I'm always like, oh, that's great, like my dad or mom, like they're like really getting on with this friend, but it always has seemed to reach an impasse. There was always an argument, a falling out, and those people that I guess felt similar, right? My parent and one of their prospective friends finally hit their breaking point. And I think I was also embarrassed about this. I was embarrassed by this as a young child. I remember early on when they were still together, we would connect and get particularly close to another family from the school, and then something would happen, right? So we would go from having gone on vacations with them, we'd be going to each other's house every other week, to suddenly we never see each other. Right? We don't talk to them anymore. And so it felt like there was this fragility to my parents' adult relationships, that it could be so fun and promising to have their new friend around, and then suddenly they would be on bad terms, right? And we wouldn't see them anymore. And it's tricky because as much as I see this as an issue, and I say, come on, parents, what's the deal? Why can't you form deep, close relationships with other adults, right? I also completely relate to this in my own experience. And I would say I think I'm generally a bit more cordial, meaning that there's only a few bridges I've deliberately burned, but I do find myself sort of gently ebbing and flowing towards people and away from them. And when I think of how relationships usually end in my life, whether that's in a clear, decided bang or in a slow simmering out, I think they always end because we lost some kind of commonality between us. Those differences that we keep talking about, they come to the surface eventually, right? And they're too much to handle, or maybe that the similarities that we found and bonded over, they weakened over time, right? And there's just not enough there to sustain it. And so whether those connections dissipated amiably or they were severed with hostility, in the end, it all seems like it was for the better, right? It was the right thing for both of us that it ended. And I suppose it's still a shame, right? Because you kind of hope that it will be the perfect relationship and that you won't change or you won't find those differences or you won't lose that common ground. And you hope that, you are that perfect 1 in 100,000 friendship for each other, that you'll have someone who always understands. And so I think that's why it's a little sad, even when you say, like, this is for the best, because we obviously have just changed, or obviously we've realized there's some part of us that is just too fundamentally different, But I think it always is still a little sad, just because I think all parties hope that that's not the case, right? Everyone's hoping that it just continues to get closer and strong. I think about the previous example of my parents' failed adult relationships, and I think, man, wouldn't it have been nice if my parents tried to maintain that relationship with so-and-so? And then I wonder if the children of so-and-so are thinking or have ever thought the same, right? Wishing their parents had tried to keep it alive with mine. And it's necessary that these things do end sometime, right? There's situations in which a necessary boundary should be set when the connection starts to become an affront to one or both of the parties. And I certainly don't know the extent of all the behind-the-scenes adult drama that might have gone on with so-and-so and their family when I was a kid. And maybe if I knew all that stuff, right, I would side with my parents for choosing to move on and suddenly end that connection. But at the same time, you got to say, things take effort to maintain. Relationships take effort to maintain. Keeping connection often takes effort. it requires us to want to understand each other. You have to want, right? I would even say that in general in life, just good things are going to require good, substantial effort to exist. And sometimes all the pieces, they might have all been in the correct places, but if one of the players of the game loses interest and doesn't maintain that desire to understand the other person, the connection's going to die, right? Regardless of how well set up all the variables and compatibility may have been. So it's that difference that matters, trying to understand if this is a connection that could work if we put more effort into it, right? If we both really sought to understand each other, or is this a connection that will never work, right? Or it's never going to be worth it for one of us. And that's the tricky thing, because you don't want to have given up on a connection that just required mutual effort to be great, and at the same time you don't want to overcommit to a relationship that's never going to give you what you want, right? As much as you try to will through it. I'll tell a little anecdote here. The first girl that I ever dated, I broke up with her basically for no reason. The reasons that I did break up with her had nothing to do with her. I didn't like the way her mom treated her. I felt a little weird about her mom in general. I didn't feel comfortable having her around my family, which was annoying. And I hid her from my friends as well. I felt like my friends treated me different because of my relationship with her. So I had to kind of keep her separate, which was very difficult. And just my general life and other situations going on, I was very stressed and disillusioned for all sorts of reasons that didn't have to do with her. And because of that, I ended up ghosting her after she kind of got the hint that I was trying to end the relationship. And I didn't really feel any guilt about that until a few months after. And that's because at the time I just felt like a person who couldn't breathe, and I just wanted to breathe. And all I was concerned with was trying to get little gasps of air. And at the time it seemed like the only solution was to shut people out and disconnect from the complications of other people so I could get that fresh air that I really wanted. And in a lot of ways, this was quite reasonable for the situation I was in, because the relationship with my main friends had soured in certain ways, and I kind of had to give them distance, and they deserved the distance, honestly. But that girl definitely didn't deserve for me to cut her off, seemingly for no reason. And it's still more likely than not that if the relationship had continued, we probably would have eventually found the normal conflicts you find, or we would have discovered that line that separates us, and it would have come to pass like these things naturally do. But I regret having ended it in a way that didn't really give it a fair shot, especially out of consideration of how she must have felt. And this was 9 years ago now. But I have some guilt about that sort of comes and goes in seasons, as I think it's the one time in my life where for sure I know I was very unfair to someone else. And in the end, what I've learned, I guess in the years of processing it too, is that I may have been just as unfair to her as I was to myself. By shutting my connection with others, it also kind of prevented me from any constructive healing I could have done then, maybe instead of shutting people out in a time of distress, I could have tried turning to them, right? I could have just told her I was having a really bad time in general. I could have expressed those, all those little grievances I had, about her mom, or feeling weird about bringing her with my family, or whatever it was, right? I could have just been open about it instead. And nowadays, it seems so obvious to me that it was a wrong choice. When I was there, however, living that life, which I've really forgotten the texture of, I don't remember, I don't intimately feel and remember that way that I did then, which was very bad. And when I was feeling that way, it felt like it was the only choice. That's something I kind of forget too, why did I make that choice? It's not like I knew then it was bad. It made sense then. It felt like the right choice at the time. There was a very real part of me then that needed distance from other people to protect myself. And I suppose that's a big theme here of this conversation, that there's kind of a strange thing you can experience where you're trying to close that divide between the internal and external world, between you and others. And the closer you get, you might find these discrepancies that are tragic and will actually then make you choose to live a life more in solitude, which is kind of a strange motion if we consider all of the events on the timeline. There's parts of myself that may never be seen or be understood in the way that I want them to be. And who knows? Maybe someday someone will be able to see. But also, maybe people already see those things, but it just doesn't do for me what I want it to do, or what I think it could do. But if you've seen my other videos, you know that I love people. I'm a pro-social guy. That's my angle. And there's so many reasons why I feel that way. Other people, you could say, are just inherently interesting because, hey, it seems like they're having an experience of life in the same way that I am also strangely having an experience of life. And that's already pretty weird and fascinating, right? I can compare our experiences and sort of investigate what they're going through, compare it to what I'm going through in the strange thing that we call life. And people are responsible for all the good things in life, right? They built the world I live in. All the things that I love, they've made. They've entertained me. They've taught me. They've laughed with me. They've made me laugh. I've made them laugh. All good things, right? Yet there's still always this sense that I have that I wish I could share certain feelings with others that seem unshareable. And that there are feelings that feel that they are begging to be shared. And maybe it's exactly the fact that they can't be shared which makes me want to share them so badly. And so, in terms of this connecting with others thing, and wondering if it's how deep can we go, how possible is it, I have two perspectives within me. Very, very strongly, I have two perspectives, both alive and well, these perspectives. One believes that if we are practical about this, I can never share those feelings because no one will ever really know to get what it's been like to live my life except for me. And likewise, I'm never really going to understand what it's been like for someone else to have been them and lived their life. That's the first perspective. The other perspective I have is that there's billions of people on Earth. You can find people who have enough in common to cut through that invisible line, or at least puncture it briefly, that in a way that's satisfactory. And from this perspective, the big conundrum of life is just that you have to wade through a numbers game if you want to find that true deep connection. Because maybe there's hundreds of thousands of people on this planet who I could have that profoundly deep connection with that would transform my whole paradigm about this invisible line thing. And maybe if I met one of these people, it would change the whole way I view connection as a concept. But I just haven't met that person yet. I haven't met that 1 in 100,000 because they are 1 in 100,000. And in a weird way, I think most of us get our fix for connection, or at least myself I'm speaking for here, is through art, through things that other people make. But I would say that art is a single direction form of connection, right? One person is on the receiving end of the medium. And if you receive that artwork, you're the one who's experiencing some kind of connection. But the creator doesn't really experience any reciprocal connection to the audience, to the person perceiving the artwork. And of course, there's some there's some brief ways that you might experience that. You see the response from your audience, like motions in a crowd or comments on a video or something. But I don't think it's anything you can really compare to the other side, which is receiving someone else's meticulous creation wholeheartedly. Right? And so I will experience tremendous value from something that someone else made, and I get this sense of connectedness that is transcendent, right? To their work, and even a sense of connection to them. Yet if I don't tell them that, it's not like they're going to feel the connection on their end, right? It's not like they're going to wake up in the middle of the night and think, oh man, somebody's watching my video right now. I'm feeling that connection to that person watching the video, right? I don't know if someone's watching my video and feeling connected to the message unless they tell me personally. Then I know. And then even then, all I can say is, wow, that's great, which is true. I'm really happy for you, which is true. But I can't feel what they're feeling, right? I'm just the person who made something that helped someone else feel a certain way. Doesn't mean that I feel it. And I get my own fixes by feeling a certain way, by using other things that people have made to help other people feel a certain way. And I'm sure the people who made those things that help me feel a certain way have their own outlets as well, their own ways to get their fix of connectedness and unique feelings. That's my talk. My computer's broken right now. But I wanted to say something. I wanted to get something out there rather than saying nothing, even if it doesn't have all the bells and whistles I usually like to have on a video. So yeah, things are going to be paused for a little while here, but they won't be paused forever. My positive advice suggestion to you is I challenge you to try writing out your thoughts, because it's going to help you make sense of them, especially when it just seems like a mess.